Football's golden oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster. Was Len more prince than clown? Len Shackleton never won a thing, not a league championship, not an FA Cup medal. It follows then that he did not play for an outstanding club side during his 17-year career with Bradford Park Avenue, Newcastle United and Sunderland. His legion of admirers, me included, regard the fact that he only won 5 caps for England as an insult to the outstanding ability of this unique, unusual footballer. But you will have to take my word for it, because little or no film exists of the great man in action. Yet, nearly 70 years after he stopped playing, Len Shackleton remains a legend in Bradford, Newcastle and Sunderland. And wherever precious memories of his magical ball control and outrageous showmanship are preserved. With the gifts he possessed, he would have been a sensation in today's football. But would he? They dubbed Shaq the Clown Prince of Soccer. But was he really more prince than clown? Extraordinary boy from Bradford. As a young boy, he never went anywhere without a tennis ball in his pocket. This was the golden age of street football. He would eventually become known as the Clown Prince of Soccer. Arguably the most skillful player that ever paraded his football skills in Britain was Leonard Francis Shackleton. His skill with a ball was legendary. No player, before or since, commanded a football like Shaq. Len was unusual in that his toes were longer than his fingers, possibly giving him his extraordinary control of the ball. Just think about that. Toes may be twice as long as normal. He also played in rugby boots because the leather was much softer than football boots, giving him far more feel and control of the ball. Jimmy Hogan famously said, "Shaq is a football genius." Len was unpredictable, brilliantly inconsistent, flamboyant, radical and mischievous, as well as being very intelligent. In short, he possessed all the attributes of a football genius, which he undoubtedly was, but none of these gifts brought him favour from the Football Association or the Football League, all men from the Victorian age. 2 minutes of his genius is worth the admission price alone. That's what Stanley Matthews thought. Growing up in the depression-blighted 1930s, like most of his football contemporaries, Shaq was self-taught. It was his love of the game that saw him take his first steps to control a ball. His first ball was made of brown paper bound with elastic bands that his grandfather gave him. A tennis ball was a huge upgrade, and when he was given the loathsome task of shopping, he would grab a friend and pass the ball between them to the shops and back. The schoolyard, the fields nearby, and even in the house, with his parents' permission, meant he practiced all day, every day. This was the golden age of street football, the loss of which many a coach blames for the decline in the technical ability of British football. Street football more or less disappeared in the 1950s, with more families owning cars and even buying television sets. How many boys today carry muddy tennis balls in their pockets? None. New football boots. Len's Uncle John always wanted him to become a footballer. Uncle John bought a bag of studs and hammered them into an old pair of shoes for the boy who couldn't wait to test them out. Len lived in a semi-detached house at Horton Bank Top, and when he passed his scholarship examination, he had the choice of half a dozen schools in Bradford. He plumped for Carlton High, a grammar school that encouraged football. Sportsmaster Walter Hodgson soon spotted his talent and he was quickly in the first 11. The next step up for Shack was selection for Bradford Schools against Stoke Boys at the old Victoria ground. The game against Stoke stood out for Shack with the presence of Stoke City's England internationals Frank Sue and Stanley Matthews acting as linesmen. Onwards and upwards for Lightning Shack. The Bradford Telegraph and Argus reported that the boy Shackleton is a great football star of the future. He was next selected to play for the North against the Midlands in an England trial and then was selected to play for the Rest versus England boys at Kettering. Despite being the smallest boy on view at 4 foot 11 inches tall, weighing 6 stone 2 pounds, Len was picked to play for England schoolboys against Wales at Aberdare. He became the first Bradford schoolboy to gain international honours. England won 6-2, with Len scoring twice and making 3 other goals. In 14 school representative games he scored 40 goals, twice registering 6 in one match. Selected for England boys versus Wales boys, and you can see him there shaking hands with his school friends. On the road to fame, Len is congratulated by his schoolmates on being chosen for his first international, England boys versus Wales boys in 1936. Park Avenue come calling. Manager of Bradford Park Avenue, Billy Hardy, knocked on the door of 38 Soper Lane and invited Len to join them as an amateur and train on Tuesday and Thursday nights. The whole of the Shackleton family were supporters of Bradford City and were uncomfortable with Len signing for the other lot. Len played for Bradford Park Avenue and Kippax United in the Leeds League. Schoolmaster John Clowes, who had an interest in Kippax United, recommended Len to Arsenal. Out of the blue, a Rolls Royce turned up at 38 Soper Lane, Bradford, and George Allison, the Arsenal manager, stepped out and signed Shack onto Arsenal's ground staff as an amateur in 1938. Finally at Highbury, a young Len Shackleton trains at Highbury in 1938 with Bobby Daniel, the brother of Ray Daniel, who would play in the same team as Shack at Sunderland. Bobby was an excellent prospect, but he joined the RAF during the war and was tragically killed. Life at Highbury. At 16, Len couldn't sign professional forms until he was 17, so he was handed a pair of overalls and told to follow the mower and cut any long grass that was missed. All the young lads would watch the first team players doing their training for hours and then would kick a tennis ball around in the passages of Highbury. A strange exchange with George Allison and Len stood his ground. Allison called out to Len, who was sweeping the terraces, "Come over here, son." He put his foot on the railing and said, "Fasten my shoelace." "Fasten the bloody thing yourself," replied Len, showing that any sort of authority would be challenged if he thought they were wrong. He wore the famous red and white strip only twice, against Oxford University and Bristol Rovers, and played for Enfield most of the time in the Athenian League. A week before the end of the season, Allison called him to his office and said he was too small at 5'2" to make the grade as a professional player. He advised Len to return to Bradford and get a job as a miner, an engineer or a commercial traveller. Devastated, humiliated and ashamed. He couldn't face going home and telling family and friends, that he had been released after his meeting with Alice. He took a job at London Paper Mills in Dartford and turned out for the Works team in the Kent League. From £2.50 a week at Arsenal to 80 pence at the Paper Mills, but the boss, Frank Langan, found him lodgings and covered the cost. Len never forgot his kindness, and in 1946, after being selected to play for England against Scotland, he returned to Dartford to meet old friends and said, "Frank alone saved me the shame of scuttling home, a heartbroken flop." Frank Langan said, "I'll find you lodgings, pay the rent and give you extra for spending money." The offer was equivalent to double pay for a boy of Len's age. When the football season ended, he played cricket through the summer of 1939 for the Paper Mills and then football, but his mother kept pleading with him to return to Bradford as the war began. He went home but never forgot Frank Langan. When he played for England much later, the staff of the London Paper Mills lined up to greet Len Shackleton when he was first selected for England. Frank Langan, he stood fourth from the right next to Shack, who stood fourth from the left. They remained firm friends for many years, as Len never forgot the debt he owed Frank. Bradford Park Avenue, 1940 to 47. Christmas 1940, and Len signed professional forms for Park Avenue. Under Football League rules, he was entitled to a £10 signing on fee. The club was flat broke, so they gave him 10 shillings and the rest at 7 shillings and sixpence a week. Len never got the full £10. Shack celebrated his new professional status by playing against Leeds United at Ellen Road on Christmas morning, and then guested for Bradford City at Huddersfield in the afternoon. Between 1940 and 1946, Len scored 171 league and cup goals in 209 appearances. During the war, he worked for GEC, assembling aircraft engines, meaning he wasn't called up for national service. Memories of Park Avenue. Ron Greenwood, a teammate at Park Avenue and future England manager, said, "Len was a showman, a crowd pleaser. He could cut his foot under the ball so sharply it would spin towards an opponent 15 yards away and then come back to him as if on a piece of string." Len had many other tricks as well, including beating a defender by bouncing the ball off the corner flag, and he was an expert at dropping corner kicks onto the crossbar. The ultimate entertainer, crowds invariably got their money's worth from the legendary Shack. GEC moved to Coventry. Shack was asked to continue his work for GEC but didn't want to move, so he received notice that he would have to do his national service or choose the alternative, which was to state a preference for coal mining. Papers arrived to report as a Bevan boy at Friston Colliery near Castleford, 35 miles away. Len and Jimmy had to leave home at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to the mine for 9 o'clock, and the journey was repeated at the end of the shift, a dreadful way of life. Coming down in the pit cage, the torture box, terrified Len and his mate Jimmy Stephen. Soon though, Len would attract the attention of the big clubs. Clinched the deal with a threepenny bit. Len, Wilf Taylor, Stan Seymour and Chairman George Rutherford. Fred Emery, Bradford Park Avenue manager, wanted a record fee. Newcastle director Wilf Taylor threw a threepenny bit onto the table to add to the £13,000 fee that had been agreed, making it a record deal. Transfer transfer to Newcastle United, October 1946. Albert Stubbins had been transferred to Liverpool from Newcastle for £13,000, and Albert was the only footballer to feature on the cover of the Beatles' Sergeant Pepper album. Len always said afterwards it was like being at a cattle market and he was the prize bull. Stan Seymour, Newcastle's director/manager, promised Len £500 for signing, although I believe his title should have been dictated. Stan Seymour broke his promise to pay Len £500 and Shack never forgot the deception. Shack's debut against Newport County on October 5, 1946 produced a 13-0 victory, with Len scoring 6, 3 of them in 155 seconds, and he knocked in the last of his 6 with his backside, typical Shack. Another transfer. Len clashed regularly with Newcastle directors. They had promised him a house similar to the one he was leaving, but didn't keep their word. Len was a very eloquent and intelligent man, and he believed that people should not make hollow promises. A transfer was inevitable. From Division 2 to Division 1. Len was playing golf with Tommy Pearson, who was a scratch golfer, and Jack Fairbrother on a cold February day in 1948. When he was told to report to St James Park immediately, obviously a transfer was on the table. Did he rush? Not Shack. He completed the remaining 17 holes with his friends. Arsenal, the champions, were ready to pay £20,000, as were Portsmouth, Blackpool, Bolton Wanderers, Liverpool, Manchester City, Aston Villa and Sunderland. All First Division clubs, plus Hull City and Bury from the local leagues, 10 clubs in all. One club he would never sign for was Arsenal, because of his treatment at the hands of George Allison. Transfer clinched with a £50 note. Record transfer, £20,000 and 50, clinched by Colonel Joe Pryor, who threw a £50 note on the table. Sid Collins, Shack and Billy Murray, the manager, as well as the Colonel, all looked delighted. Team that toppled the world champions. December 1954, names and number of caps. On the rear we see Bill Slater with 12, Roger Byrne with 33, Len Phillips with 3, Bert Williams 24, Ron Staniforth 8, Roy Bentley 12. On the front row we see Stan Matthews 54, Len Shackleton 5, Billy Wright 105, Ronnie Allen 5, Tom Finney 76. England were in the lucky red shirts, as in 1966. Shackleton, Finney and Matthews torment Germany. 100,000 fans paid a record £51,716. Len was never purely interested in the money, but the injustice of the wages when playing in front of 100,000 fans and arriving home £20 better off, he, as much as anyone, did more to get the maximum wage abolished. Len was given a match fee of £50 and a third-class rail ticket for the overnight sleeper back to Sunderland. Len said to the bowler hat handing him the ticket, "Couldn't you raise enough money for a first-class ticket?" By the time he had paid tax, he was left with £20. The blinkered fools who ran the Football Association considered the players third-class citizens. That's what Len thought about them. England won 3-1 with goals from Bentley, Allen and Shackleton. Shaq's goal was a stunner as he drifted through the German defence and chipped the goalkeeper, one of his favourite party tricks. Sunderland were the Bank of England team. You can see the amounts on the tags round the waist. Daniel record fee for defender, and of course it was Ray's brother who was at Arsenal, with Shaq being before his tragic death in World War II. They forgot to put the extra 50 on Len's transfer fee. Maybe it was Trevor Ford at fault. Bank of England problems. Sunderland started the 48-49 season with their new inside right signing from Newcastle, and straight away his dazzling dribbles and individual ball juggling became the hub of nearly every attacking move. From now on, Sunderland centre-forwards wore a worried look on their faces. He was a style of play completely foreign to them, and few of them found the answer. 21 other players on the field were transfixed as Shaq did tricks with the ball, the like of which they had never seen before. Trevor Ford, the Welsh centre-forward, was a huge critic of Shaq, saying he never passed to him, and they appeared to dislike each other off the field and never seemed to strike up an understanding on it. Billy Bingham recalls, "I remember after criticism on this subject, we went to play a game in Holland and won 7-3, with Len making one of the goals by going right through the Dutch defence with an amazing dribble, finally sending the goalkeeper the wrong way with a feint. Then when he only had to tap the ball into the net, Len rolled the ball back to Ford, who was on the edge of the box, shouting, 'Here you are, Fordy, don't say I never give you a pass.' Trevor Ford controlled himself well enough to be able to crash the ball into the back of the net." At this point in the argument, it is probably worth mentioning that one of the greatest attacking players British football has ever seen never had any trouble combining with Len Shackleton. Tom Finney said, "I always found him very simple to play with. It was a question of reading the play, but I just felt he was a very, very skillful player and great to play with." Clearly this destructive personal relationship could not be allowed to continue, and matters came to a head after a game against Aston Villa, when Ford told manager Billy Murray he had to choose between himself and Shackleton, as he refused to shake hands with Shaq and make up. In the end, Sunderland decided to cut their losses and sell Ford, which they did in November 1953, when he was quietly sold to Cardiff City for £30,000, exactly what they had paid for him 3 years earlier. Baby of the team, Stan Anderson, arrived on the scene too late to witness the Shackleton-Ford feud at first hand, but said, "I heard all about it. They said Shaq used to play the ball just in front of Trevor, so he couldn't get to it, but the opposite was true of him in the first match I played against Wolves. Dickie Davies had replaced Ford, and Shaq tried his damnedest to make Dickie a better player, and he scored 3 goals with great passes from Len." Skill with half a crown. Len was famous for one particular piece of skill, with a half crown, and it all started when Don Revie arrived at Sunderland, who Len considered to be a braggart and a show-off. Revie was in the dressing room bragging to the lads about his latest trick. He was flicking a sixpence up in the air, catching it on his foot, then flicking it back up in the air and catching it in his blazer pocket. After a few days, Revie said to Len, "Shaq, are you not going to have a go?" Shaq replied, "Hey Revie, have a look at this, will you? What about this?" Len wasn't flicking it a foot and a half in the air as Revie had, but right up to the ceiling, catching it on his foot, then lobbing it back up and finally into his blazer pocket. That was great, stealing the thunder from Revy, the show-off. Len and his great friend Brian Clough never liked Revy. Supreme entertainer. The stories surrounding Shaq are too numerous to print, that many deserve to be told again, like how he loved humiliating his old club Arsenal by putting his foot on the ball in the penalty area, pretending to check his watch and comb his hair. Such tales of his antics are commonplace, with back-heeled penalty kicks, that was true, and wall passes with the corner flag, just some of the tricks in Len's repertoire. A Football Association councillor, when asked why Len had only received 5 caps, said, "We play at Wembley Stadium, not the London Palladium." If Shaq wasn't playing, the attendance at Sunderland would slump by at least 10,000 fans. 5 England caps, see the guilty men at the FA. Arthur Drury, Grimsby fisherman, married into a Grimsby fish merchant's business in 1919. Never played football, and his greatest contribution to the game was insisting that Stanley Matthews didn't play against the United States of America in the 1950 World Cup. Harold Shentel, Chesterfield provision merchant, chairman of Chesterfield Football Club, never played football. Harry French, a wholesale greengrocer from Chesterfield, never played football. Sir Amos Brookhurst, Huddersfield solicitor, never played football. Arthur Oakley, retired Wolverhampton businessman, never played football. Joe Mears, London transport contractor, born in 1905, played goalkeeper for the Old Malvernians, Old Boys of Malvern College, Worcester, before joining Chelsea Board of Directors in 1931, becoming the youngest director in football at 21 in the Football League. He died in Oslo of a heart attack 2 weeks before the 1966 World Cup. Each of these men had a finger in the England pie without improving the quality of the dish, and it is little wonder that England have only ever won 1 World Cup thanks to Alf Ramsey ignoring all of these charlatans to bring about the miracle of 1966. All had one thing in common, according to Len, a striking absence of any soccer playing background of any note. Incident could have been from a primary school. When Len was asked the question, on reflection, do you think your outspoken approach cost you England caps your talent clearly deserved? He replied, without doubt, and whilst I didn't manage to win 5 caps, I always felt I should have won more. To be honest, the England setup was a complete shambles, and the manager Walter Winterbottom was absolutely useless. I remember him, he always wore a tracksuit with WW on the front, and I called him Washerwoman. As a typical example, we were playing the League of Ireland in Dublin, and on the morning of the match, Walter gave his tactical talk, starting with our goalkeeper, Big Frank Swift. He said, "Frank, when you get the ball, throw it out to Eric Westwood. Eric, you pass it on to Harry Johnson. Harry, you move it up to Peter Harris." He went through the entire team, mimicking all the playing actions as he spoke, until finally the ball ends up in the box, and you, Shaq, you kick it in. Can you credit it? At such a level, you kick it in. He couldn't even say, shoot. Apart from that, he had ignored one minor detail, the opposition. Where were they in all of this? So I couldn't resist it and replied, "Which corner would you like it in, Walter?" I find this story incredible, but not surprising, and other players substantiate it. Retired with injury, 57-58. First game of the season, and Shaq suffered a serious ankle injury. After a specialist warned him that he would end up in a wheelchair, Shaq retired. The supreme ball artist and entertainer was gone from the field of play. Would things be quiet in the world of soccer? Len would work for the Daily Express for 6 years and then move to the Sunday People for a further 20 years, where he would continue to rattle the cages of the establishment. Len would be responsible for putting Brian Clough and Peter Taylor on the road to management, getting them jobs at Hartlepool and Derby County. As well as a journalist, Len had numerous other businesses during his life in football, and as well as post-retirement. Great friends. Jackie Youngman admired Len more than anybody because he fought to get rid of the maximum wage. In the 1951 FA Cup final, Shaq went into the Newcastle dressing room and said, "You want to refuse to play because they are making over £40,000 on the gate and you lot are on £12 a week, buttons." The Newcastle players thought about it seriously, but decided if they went on strike, the directors would simply send out 11 other players. They would not bow down to pressure. Influential Shaq. Shaq had access to many Football League chairmen like the horrible man at Hartlepool United, Ernest Ord, and got Clough the job. Brian moved from coaching the third team at Sunderland to become manager of Hartlepool's, the worst team in football. Later, Shaq told Clough that he could work the oracle for him a second time and get him the top job at Derby County because of his friendship with the Rams chairman, Sam Longson. Clough wasn't even sure how to get to Derby, so he met Longson at a hotel at Scotch Corner on the A1. The result was he became manager of Derby County after 2 years at Hartlepool United. He never forgot his debt to Shaq and they remained close friends, apart from the odd argument along the way. But you would expect that, wouldn't you? Entertainer and football genius. Brian Redhead, the author, broadcaster and journalist, recalled an early memory of his favourite player. The man I liked most of all, I suppose, when I was a teenager, was Len Shackleton, a man of immense wit. I once saw him take a penalty against Man City, who had the great Frank Swift in goal. Len put the ball on the spot, and he then walked almost to the halfway line before turning and racing like a train towards the ball. He took a tremendous kick at the ball, and Frank Swift dived, but the ball was still on the spot. Shaq hadn't actually touched it, and he simply turned around and backheeled it into the net, and the crowd went raving mad. Frank walked out of his goal, took Len Shackleton's head in between those great frying pan hands and kissed him. Now that is entertainment, and my favourite story of a football artist. I did see Len play against Manchester City at Main Road in the 1950s, but cannot remember the day or anything about the game except to marvel at his skill on the ball. Outstanding at any sport. Len played minor counties cricket for Northumberland and Durham. He could have played county cricket, but turned down all the offers. Holiday in Morecambe, also known as Bradford by the Sea. During the war, Len and a Bradford Park Avenue teammate, Jimmy Stephen, were on holiday with their wives in Morecambe when Jimmy announced he was going to enter the Open tennis tournament in Regent's Park. A very keen tennis player, Jimmy invited Len to join him, using his wife's racket. The problem was that Len had never played the game before, and in the absence of television coverage, didn't even know how how to score. Needless to say, the complete novice went on to win the tournament by virtue of his ability to control and manipulate a moving ball better than 99% of people. Somewhere in Morecambe is a hotel or boarding house that had one of the greatest football players of all time as a guest. I wonder which one it was. The average director's knowledge of football. This chapter has deliberately been left blank in accordance with the author's wishes. Len wrote his autobiography in 1955 and the public clamoured to buy it during the summer months. It was so popular the publishers were on a 5th edition by Christmas. Copies were changing hands at £200 each. The queues outside bookshops were longer than the ones at Roker Park on a match day. Shack called the footballer's contract an evil document that was hopelessly one-sided, and players were puppets dancing on the end of a piece of string, held by their lords and masters, the directors of the club. More stories from Len about directors. In my opinion, 90% of directors know nothing about football, while the other 10% are even more of a hindrance to the manager because they know sufficient to command attention from players. There was a Midlands club chairman who instructed his manager to make all the players kick, not with the instep, but with the toe, to make the ball travel further. In my early days, I met one director who came into the dressing room before the start and after asking if my spikes were comfortable, said, "It's going to be very windy today, so keep the ball up in the air." I laughed. He didn't. Then, of course, there is a classic story about Arsenal playing Man United at Old Trafford and being 3 goals down at half-time. An Arsenal director observed, "I hope we can keep up this good form in the second half." Someone disillusioned him by pointing out that Arsenal were playing in white shirts, having had to change because of their red colours clashed with Manchester United's colours. I shall never forget some half-time advice administered by a director to a wing half of one team in which I played. "You should stop marking the opposing inside forward from behind. Stand in front of him to stop the ball reaching him." Fortunately, my teammate was experienced enough to laugh about it, but a youngster might have felt compelled to obey such tactical trash, and matches can be lost that way. Footballer, journalist, entrepreneur and family man. You can see in the photograph Len reprimands his son Graham for eating the sweets. At various times from the end of World War II until 1985, Len and his wife Marjorie ran a series of successful businesses. An ice cream parlour in County Durham, a sweet shop, a hairdresser's, an off-licence, a general dealer's and haberdashery, plus a wool shop in Sunderland, and in Grange-over-Sands, a gift shop, cafe and holiday flats. In 1985, the business was sold and they bought an apartment in Tenerife where they would spend the winter months, mainly due to Shack's mild emphysema. Referees. The soccer referee and the fairground Aunt Sally have a lot in common. Both are on public show to be shot at by everyone. Len always sympathised with referees and often said, "I like to meet a referee with a sense of humour," and Arthur Ellis was one of those who, ignoring my remarks of terrible decisions several times during a match, waited until I missed an open goal, then ran past me saying, "Terrible shot." Paddy Power of York is another who doesn't object to a bit of leg pulling. He was talking to a group of Sunderland players on Stalybridge railway station one night when up came a blind man, his white stick tip-tapping along the platform. So I pulled Paddy and a couple of players out of the blind man's way with the warning, "Stand aside, there's a referee coming." Ever since that night, whenever I meet Paddy Power, his greeting has been, "I've left my white stick at home, Shack." Arthur Ellis, in my opinion, is the finest referee in soccer because he is liked yet respected. He is one of us, but always the governor. Len Shackleton died on November 28, 2000 in Kendal Hospital. The football genius was cremated at Lancaster and Morecambe Crematorium, and I was proud to be there. After all, he was one of my heroes as a teenager. It was a terrible day, freezing cold and wet. It was a quiet affair as the family had requested, but I'm sure I saw Billy Bingham and Bob Stoker. Tom Finney had found out that his great friend wasn't well, so he rang him, and although Len was struggling to breathe, he enjoyed talking to his great friend Tom. 1 week later, he was dead. In 150 years of British football, I never heard or read of another player who could control the ball and entertain the crowd better than Leonard Francis Shackleton. I hope you enjoyed hearing about a classical footballer who was never appreciated by the fools in charge of the game. When I watched Jimmy Greaves being interviewed by Brian Moore, who asked the question, "Who was your favourite player, Jimmy?" His reply didn't surprise me when Jimmy said, "My favourite player is Len Shackleton, who does things on a football field that no other player does. He goes out every Saturday to entertain the